All right, so I just want to make a really quick video here on muscle contractions. All right, so we're actually not going to start here. We're just going to start. So this picture, it looks pretty complicated, but it's not too bad. So what we're looking at here is if you look at this picture here, there's a synaptic terminal, and it's attached to this massive thing. So we have to kind of understand the hierarchy here of what's going on. So this whole tube is called a muscle fiber, okay? And they're found in groups. So these are muscle fibers here, and they're found in groups called simply a bundle of muscle fiber, okay? So it's this tube within a tube within a tube type of thing that we have here. And the mnemonic I came up with, it was buy 4 more shoes. So we have the bundle itself, we have the muscle fiber, okay? Then we have what's called a myofibril, which is really the important thing here. And then it's made up of these sections called sarcomeres, which we can see, okay? There is a middle part, though, which they really don't show here, and it's that the myofibril is wrapped. The myofibril here is actually wrapped, it's not even in this picture at all, in what's called a sarcoplasmic reticulum. So you just have to remember that that's kind of in the middle. I know that doesn't work with the mnemonic, but there we go. Okay, we also need to understand that there's 2 things at play here. There's thin filaments and there's thick filaments, okay? One is called actin, one is called myosin. So just remember that A comes first in the alphabet, M comes second, thin is simpler, so it comes before thick. So thin is going to be these actin filaments, thick is going to be these myosin filaments, which are characteristic by these myosin heads, all right, these globular proteins. These are the myosin heads here, and these are the actual things that are going to be connecting to the thin, dual-stranded actin filaments and actually pushing them and actually contracting these muscle fibers, okay? All right, so how does this happen? So we have on the left, so again, this is our myofibril. This is our muscle fiber. All these little kind of tan circles with the blue dots in the middle, those are the myofibrils, okay? So a synapse is going to come and attach to the entire muscle fiber. It's going to use acetylcholine as its neurotransmitter. It's going to send action potentials on this myofibril. And then we're going to see that there's this sarcoplasmic reticulum here. And this is an important thing because this is loaded with calcium ions. So again, the synapse is going to use acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. It's going to send action potentials to the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is going to release calcium ions. What are these calcium ions going to do? Well, this is an actin filament, okay? This is a thin actin filament. But what happens is, this is like a very simple version of this. So let's go over this just real quick. So we have our actin filament and we have our myosin thick filament below this. It actually starts with ATP already attached to it. And it's kind of a reverse thing because that's in its low energy configuration. It is not attached to actin at all. What happens is that ATP needs to be hydrolyzed into ADP and inorganic phosphate, which is exactly what happens here. So ATP actually goes away and it activates this myosin head. So I guess you could say the ATP is being used, and now we have the ADP and we have inorganic phosphate. So now we're ready to go. We are in this high energy configuration, and we can actually bond and we can make this cross bridge with our thin actin filament, okay? So then once that happens, we can get rid of the ADP and the inorganic phosphate. We get rid of that, we release it, and that is able to actually power the power stroke that pushes the actin filament. So the myosin head is moving, the actual myosin itself, like this strand of 7 bars or whatever, 8. That doesn't matter. They're not actually moving, but the myosin head is kind of pushing this dual strand, okay? And then what happens is ATP comes along and releases it, okay? And this is the reason when people die, rigor mortis is a thing, because you need ATP to release this myosin head, and it keeps everything rigid. It keeps muscles contracted because you need ATP actually to relax a muscle, which is this phase here, this low energy configuration, okay? So there's a little bit more involved though. So let's go back to what we were talking about. So again, we have this motor neuron sending a message via the acetylcholine neurotransmitters. It's sending action potentials into this muscle fiber itself, into the microfibrils, okay, but through this sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is full of all these calcium ions. So here's the thing. This actin double-stranded thin filament has another part to it, and this is our troponin complex, which is the troponin itself and then the tropomyosin. And this actually blocks these binding sites. You can see these little holes in these little balls here in the actin that are kind of covered up. And that is where our myosin wants to latch onto and push the muscle. But it's not able to do that because troponin is covering that up. Well, what releases that and what exposes the actin? Calcium. So here's this calcium here that came all the way from the neurotransmitter, from that synapse. I'm sorry, that's where the message started. The calcium came from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, but their triggering came from the acetylcholine and the neurotransmitter action potential through the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So the calcium's going to come in and allow this binding to happen. And then what I just said with myosin, that whole thing can happen. So you have the ATP in its relaxed state that gets hydrolyzed to ADP and inorganic phosphate. The myosin binds to the actin. It releases the ADP and or inorganic phosphate. It releases, which powers that power stroke, and then ATP comes along and relaxes the muscle by releasing the myosin. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, this is just saying this in a different way. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. And that's a single skeletal muscle fiber. That's an all or none twitch. The combination of all of that is what is going to contract a whole muscle.